Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone who is here tonight on a beautiful spring night. I'm grateful to see so many people, and I'm happy to be here. So I'll do a little brief introduction of myself and talk a little bit, and then I'm going to share a bunch of my sketchbooks with you so you can see kind of how I work. And then I will do a little demo kind of later after I share some work. So I live in the St. Louis Park with my husband, Gary. He is my secret weapon. He is the reason that there are any videos of anything that has ever happened in my life. So if I ever become famous and die, I will be very well documented in a good and not so good ways. Um, so he's my tech guy, the curtain behind the Oz. Yes, I grew up in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And at the time, it was unstructured, wandering, playing outside, and you didn't come home at the end of the day until you heard your mom call from the porch. And I feel like I've always tried to get that feeling back of curiosity and exploration. And that's kind of where the Nature Sketchbooks started for me. And I also had a public school system that had a great program: jewelry, ceramics, weaving, textiles, drawing, and painting. And I took every class for every year for 4 years. And at the end of your senior high school year, you even had your own space and show. And I thought that, when you're a kid, you think that everyone has the same life. And so that's kind of how I got my start. I had a really important painting teacher who was pivotal in getting me into college. So, which was a windy road, wasn't a straight line, but that's kind of how my early background is. I've worked in a lot of really large pastels in the past, like probably 6 feet by 4 feet, giant fruits and vegetables. And that was back when Kitty Wallace was making her sandpaper. And so I used to use house paint and pastel on sandpaper for many years. I've also worked in licensing. So I would rent or sell my copyright for designs onto product in the gift market, textiles, paper, rugs, coasters. And I did that for about a decade. And that made my work very accessible to my mama. Then that made sense to go to school for art, because then you can go into Target and places like that and say, that's my daughter's rug. So that was one of the ways that like I suggested, a weekly path. That was one of the areas that I spent a lot of time. I'll talk a little bit about why sketchbooks feel so good to me. Is I can have this tool with me in a very small, nimble way. And that creates for me is I work more, and then I get better at my work because I'm practicing. And versus an easel and expensive equipment and precious paper, and the dollar signs are in your head, and then you frame. And so I was growing tired of that kind of process, and I was working less. I love books. And so what I started to do in the sketchbooks was just put myself in an environment that I craved, which for me was outdoors and nature and gardens. And I worked for a while at a flower shop. And so that all that information, all that subject matter really kind of motivated my sketchbooks. I think what I'll do is I'll just start sharing some of my books. If any, I love and admire botanical work. And I have spent some time doing that kind of work just to kind of get better at observation. And I've taken classes with, everyone knows who Marilyn is, bless her heart. The botanical work that I've done has been through her workshops, through the botanical school. This is a piece that I did for one of her classes. And I love kind of the slow, meditative, careful work. I like the results of that style, but I also I felt like I wanted to work quicker and looser in my approach. So a lot of times you'll find some of my work that has kind of a tight area, a careful area, and then a lot of really unfinished, loose, kind of blown out parts to a painting. What I also like about the botanical work that I've seen is that I loved all the note taking and the palettes and the kind of, the brain and the hand that went into a finished page. And so that was, the more that I did it, the looser I became. So I'm just going to page through, if you guys don't mind. Most of this work is watercolor pencil, actually. So that's going to be my demo. It'll show you how far you can get with just those pencils. This is a watercolor pencil that's just graphite, just black. So one of the things that I do also is when I'm trying to figure out what I want to work on, this was at the end of the day, backyard, getting darker and darker and darker, that golden hour. I sometimes will pop in with little thumbnails on an adjacent page, just to kind of figure out what my textures are going to be, what my palette might be. It's taking some notes of the golden hour before it gets completely dark, when the backyard turns into a jungle as it slips into the dim tangle of greens. So that is kind of, like I say, if you can't get out there, you can still be on your back porch and watch things kind of unspool.
Wondering if you could tell us what sketchbook you're using with each one as you go?
Yes, I can do that. This is the Stillman Burn Delta series. It's a little creamier in color and it's super beefy. I mean, you can work these things to death. And then again, mostly watercolor pencil.
There's also a question about the watercolor pencils used.
Yes. Well, I will definitely share that in the demo. I have a couple of brands that I really like. This was a drawing that it was so hot and humid and green and heavy, and like the days of summer in Minnesota that you go, ugh, this is like the horrible day in Minnesota summer, because it was so beastly humid. So I thought I'm going to take the exact same scene and I'm going to force myself not to use any green, because the scene was just so green. So I limited it to just the blue and just kept it really light-handed. So you can see kind of the different approach to the same subject. And I do a lot of that where I pick one subject and I do it different ways over and over and over to find what really works kind of for me. Again, kind of the thumbnails on the page, a black and white often is on the page. And then I kind of work out the other, what the subject really was for me was these guys down here. This to me is kind of what I was talking about, was like really loose, but also really tight little details in certain areas that give it that kind of depth and rhythm and movement. When all fails, I get out my gouache and just start to make patterns, and that's kind of what this guy ended up being. So this is really dark all of a sudden. This page is, I stained this whole page with an ink, and then I only used a white gouache on a brush. And these are glass light fixtures at Architectural Antiques. They were all lined up on a shelf. Flowers, patterns, palettes on the side. I think I'm going to give him more attention. I see there's more work to be done. This is again one subject, many ways, just black and white, pencil first and then color. And so I kind of like, I'll break the page down to go, okay, do it again, and try a different medium each time. Detail work in here and then super loose out on the edges. Arboretum structure. This is the page that I think about when I talk about my sketchbooks being workbooks. There's a lot of things that sometimes don't work out, but there are areas that do. And so I like the note taking. I like the mess, the potential mess. And if you stare at it long enough, things will start to come forward. And that's what happened with these flowers. Same subject, a couple different ways. First, I laid down Dr. Martin dye and just stained the page a solid color. And then I went back in with patterns and gouache and colored pencil, just kind of add that wild swirl of tone. I'm working on a series of fruits and vegetables, farmers market. Again, I like to kind of pop in some patterns behind what I'm working on, tight detail to the stuff that's unfinished. These guys are kind of not quite finished, but I'm feathers in here, so I'll keep him there. Just a lot of pattern work and different shapes, trees, kind of wanted to keep it really bare bones structure wise. This page was like, kind of a mystery, but I think it's just fine and done. A lot of times what happens if I start working on something and I get distracted by color, I start to lose my sight of what I'm really seeing. And so I'll do a lot of black and white, just get out the graphite and say, okay, you need to fix this first before you can keep going with a bunch of color. Okay, should I keep going?
Wonderful.
Okay. Workbook. This is a Strathmore 500 series. This is your workhorse. There's no way to ruin it and you won't care. This is just a lot of kind of pattern work. This is an example of a page I show in my workshops quite often because I was painting drawing this thistle. And so what I ended up doing was I kind of stopped looking at the real thistle and I started filling in my head. Okay, it's a cone shape. Okay, it's violet. And when you stop looking and you put things in that don't belong, or you think that that's how it should be, you end up with something like this and or this guy. Super flat, uninteresting, tight. And so what I did was like, when I finished that, I was like, well, that is horrible. That's not at all what a thistle looks like. So then I did it over, same tools, and I made myself look harder, look more, and take my time. And so that is the result of the different approach. So I start out like this, but this to me is way more beautiful than whatever this thing is. And I keep it in here just to remind myself, just be careful and keep looking. You look way more than you draw if you're working from life. And so these are, I'm going to kind of peel through this one because this is definitely more of a workbook. And I take my notes, I tell myself how I did it, what I used, put it on the page, color first. This one says color first and then the drawing. This one's the drawing first and then the color, just to kind of see what I prefer. Pencil drawing, then a wash, then of a peony. One of my classes that I've done has been out in Utah. And so I've got a kind of a theme of Southwest book. And let's see. Sometimes when things start to fall, the wheels come off the bus, I just keep going. And then I end up doing grids of patterns and colors. And so it just is a little bit of an experiment with tools and color versus what maybe I started out thinking I was going to do. And that's okay. That's the thing about, for me, the sketchbooks is they remain workbooks. They remain a process. And so I try really hard not to get upset if I have something that didn't work out and 3 hours went by. I try to remind myself that I got to practice something for 3 hours that I wouldn't have maybe have done. This is just one marker that bleeds, which is pretty fun. Tendency to put stuff in, break it up into squares and grids, lantern. Again, the thumbnails to work out some of the details. This was a drawing that I think the urban sketchers went to a mall or something, and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to find in a mall? Well, they have potted plants in the mall. So that's where that one ended up. Same subject, different ways, notes taking, and sometimes it's just about like I started out probably doing this and I thought, where's that going to go? What's happening to that? And then I just, added up, not worrying about the page anymore and coming back another day and working on a branch right on top of this, whatever the library is. This is a piece from Architectural Antiques, a screen. And again, like I said, black and white. And then I do a little bit of both. This is one pencil, one watercolor pencil, just a black. And this is a combination. This is a orchard. And then I'm going to grab my Italy book real quick because you have that on your page. Everybody doing okay?
Just a comment. Someone said love.
Love. This is a sketchbook from Italy, in Lucca, Italy, and the paper is Amalfi, from the Amalfi Coast. And so when I bought it, I didn't believe the person was telling me the truth that it was watercolor, but it is, and it's pretty dreamy. So this is about 4-year-old book, and I'll just kind of spin through this. Sometimes I'll use text as just a design element, and what worked for me on this particular book, because I didn't understand the language, and so everything was just symbols and line and graphic. Same scene, a couple different ways, test driving, different patterns. Florence Bread Market. Florence Farmers Market. And trying the little bit of pencil on the bottom. It was a flea market, and you can see it was just filled with stuff and color. And if you look at this, it's just little brush marks of activity. And so I kept all the concentration right here and then just kind of blew out and made suggestions of the rest of the plaza. Same thing here, kind of focused on this and then just kind of let that kind of fall off. Highly kind of more detail here and then just kind of suggestions of all the garlic.
Are these watercolors or watercolor pencil?
Yep, they're mostly watercolor pencil, and some of the washes are probably, the big areas are watercolor. It's a combination. The text is fountain pen, and then I'll scribble something, and then I'll take and I'll spray it just to blur it, so that I don't necessarily want it to, if something I don't want it to have a hard edge, I'll go back in and soften it up. Rainy day. This was a day that we went to Cinque Terre and we got off the train and we got there so early that nothing was open, but the light was beautiful. Same area. I am not an architect. I'll say that for sure, but I do kind of focus just on the light and the big shapes. high contrast.
This is delightful. I feel like I'm there.
Oh, good. You recognize that place?
It's Florence, right?
Yep, yep. So a little bit of detail. And then this was kind of a night image. I wanted everything to kind of really, all this dark kind of architecture that just kind of shadows and highlight the same building. Again, pretty loose. And then one area has got a little bit more going on. So that's Italy. Should I move on to demo? Is everybody ready for that? Okay.
There's been lots of questions about sketchbook size. How do you get your paintings to go so well over the middle page creases? Those kinds of questions when you're out on a location.
I don't anticipate that any of this work will be framed or hanging anywhere. So I don't really care if something goes over a seam. I'm more about the collection as a whole, like the whole book. So I don't worry that much about that. And that could be wrong down the road. Oh,
You just noticed him?
I just noticed him. Excuse me. Special guest. So I don't worry about that as much. Like kind of in the introduction, I try really hard to treat the books like workbooks. And if they turn out great, awesome. If one page is beautiful, yay. But if there are other pages that are like, it's okay. I mean, it's drawing and painting is a practice, like any practice that you would do. If it's music or if you play an instrument or yoga, whatever, that to me is the motivation more than a really precise, beautiful, finished work. At this stage, that could change for me, but so I don't mind that things kind of look a little rough around the edges or that the seam shows up. It doesn't matter to me. So is there any other questions before I go on?
Is there a size that you like of your journal? Someone asked that.
I don't like the little tiny, I don't like those super tiny books. I feel like I don't even know where to start because there's so much in there. So most of them are at least, kind of this is like a small size for me. And this is probably an 8x5. I like them a little bit bigger. I like them to feel like a workbook size. I have some that are long and skinny, but I don't work well in the really tiny ones. I feel like I can't even get a running start for those. I have to play around because some people do crazy, beautiful stuff in these tiny little sketchbooks, and I have not been successful at that. I'll do a really quick review of this. This is a concertina book. So it's got everybody's connected in a 10-foot strip, and this is all just flowers, and it just kind of keeps going and going and going. A lot of black and white pieces, kind of working it out. When I get frustrated and I feel like I'm overworking it, I go, okay, go over here and just work out the black and white, because sometimes color it interferes, just you can't think straight. At least it's intoxicating and it's distracting. So I'll work out a black and white if I have to. And there's something really beautiful and simple about that. So this is a very long concertina book that is not done. One side is almost done. That's kind of it for that one. And so now what I'll do to keep going is, this is kind of all purples and greens. And so I'm gonna think mostly about color when I start this next phase of this book. And that's kind of how I'll process it. So I went from like a lot of kind of cinnamon hot tones to lavenders, and then back to kind of a yellowy green. And this was kind of a more neutral pattern. So now I have all this violet So I wanted to segue out of that to keep the book going. One more little bit, one more quick little bit. This is all flowers in this book, and I've just started doing greeting cards of some of the sketchbook pages so that you can actually find these on my website. But I thought some of these floral pieces I ended up making cards for those. And I think that's it for this book in that category. Okay, we're going to do some work with watercolor pencil. Let's see here. I'll do it on this side. So I'm just curious how many people work with watercolor pencils. I'm going to show you 6 to 7 ways of using watercolor pencils, and I'm going to show you one way not to use them. And maybe they'll become more interesting to you. I don't consider myself a watercolor painter. I think more of myself as a painter. I mean, I use a lot of watercolor, but I know that you guys are much better at it. So I wouldn't say, yeah, I'm this thing when I know there are pros already out there that are that thing. So I bring it into my work, but I'm not a purist. I don't keep track of my colors. I don't label my colors. I work very intuitively that way. And so that is probably one of the reasons. Watercolor pencils can be treated like paint. So I'm taking this and sharpening it, and then I'm adding my water like so, and I have a beautiful watercolor. All right, so that's one way. Another way I work with watercolor pencils is I almost never use them like a regular pencil, like making marks like that. I almost always use them on the side, drawing and painting. So from that, you're making your palette on the side of the page. And also the pencils are kind of like a tube of paint. I mean, you don't necessarily go right out of the tube when you're working. Like if that's not the green you want, you bring it up here and you add this other color and you made yourself a really pretty kind of coppery tone. So mixing them on the page, making your palette on the page, I can go and get this color and make something very beautiful and organic right from what I've used as my palette. That might not be very beautiful, but you get what I'm saying. I'm using this on the page to get what I want to get out of it versus drawing something first. Here's what we're not going to do, right, everybody? We're not going to draw our leaves, and then we're not going to color them in, right? So, and then we're not going to go like this and then add the water, because we made it super flat and we've controlled the shape really tight, and everything is just kind of laid out flat and tight. So I would take this color and keep adding to the leaves or the shape here, but I'm never going to outline and color in with colored pencil or with anything really. So we shave it. We use the side of the pencil. We make our own palettes on the page. The other thing that is really lovely is that when I use my watercolor pencils, I use them like a brush. So I dip it into the water and I can draw with a wet pencil, which can be super dreamy and very dark, rich colors like so. And I can come back in with a brush and kind of stretch that out like so. But I take the brush right into the water, or the pencil right into the water. It gives you a really juicy, dark, gorgeous color out of that pencil. So dipping, shaving, side of pencil, palette. The other thing that I'll do is I'll take the water brush, or usually the water brush, but any brush, and I'll take it right to the tip of the pencil. So I load my brush really with that color, and then I can come in here, do a beautiful kind of no lines, you know, just a rich tone from that pencil. And if it's not the right color, and quickly come in, it's another tone. The reason I do this is I can leave the house with these tools and a sketchbook. I don't need to bring anything else with me. And sometimes I only bring one watercolor pencil and the water brush, and that's it. So that's what I like about, for me, it's a crossover between painting and drawing. So the other ways that you use them is you can put the water down first, either brush it down or spray it down, and then come in with your colored pencil. And that's usually gives you, whoa, delish. Look at that. Wow. So wet page with the pencil versus if I just take a dry pencil to a dry page, I better get a dry pencil. I get this, which is fine. Then I can come in and add, I can bleed it and add water to it as I choose. So dipping, pencil shavings, side of pencil, build your own palette, brush right to the pencil, water first versus water after. We're not doing this. Don't do that, because you'll be disappointed is what you'll be. And if things get crazy, toilet paper is your friend. So you can just go and roll it and pull up whatever you don't want. It's like your kind of speedy eraser. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Is there a particular brand of pencils that you use?
Yes, I have two different brands that I like. The Derwent is one. I use that a lot. And then Faber-Castell is the other one. So just try them all and see which ones work for you. I do not like Prismacolor watercolor pencils. It's shocking how different they are on paper than they are when you see them on the, you know, in the pencil. And they don't bleed as nice. They're harder to work with. I feel like they're too waxy or something. They're just not great. So those are not my favorite. I don't recommend those. I still have this little tub of pencil shaving. This is an example of how I would probably start something. What works for me is to stay really loose to start and to really get heavy, a little more heavy-handed in the contrast, because it really defines everything for me. And again, I will sometimes do a black and white to side by side. If this starts to feel like it's falling apart, I'll start something over here. And then this is that medium I told you about. I'm going to just keep covering that because I want to go back in and work on that as well. So let's do this quickly. This will be a quick little demo, but here's my sad tulip, sad and beautiful. And I'm just going to kind of show you how I would start. I'm going to take I'm going to do it in one color just to start us off so you can kind of see. And let's just want to do a little dipping here. Like I said, I don't necessarily outline. This is going to be this guy. There's a lot going on here. I had somebody, I think it was an art professor, he said, start with a sledgehammer and finish with a jeweler's tool. So this is my sledgehammer. Because the details are last, no matter how beautiful and exotic and distracting they are, and how that's where you want to go first. I always tell people that if you don't have the birthday cake made, you can't put the candles anywhere. So this kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of just how loose I keep it for as long as possible. And I use a lot of the side of the pencil, like so. I'll throw this green in here just for fun. This guy is kind of in here. And you can kind of see it's organic. There's something happening that's going to be flower-like. Let's see here. And I might leave that dry for sometimes I walk away for a couple hours and I walk back over and I go, oh, okay, I see what's happening there. And I also can kind of keep track of my pencils. A lot of times I will isolate my pencils and put all the other pencils away so that I don't get distracted and or getting more about color and less about shape and form. So this is exactly how I would start. I'm going to fast forward into how I might go a little faster than I normally would just to get this kind of demo going here. So I just took a regular brush and I dipped it into my little shavings here. I feel like it's more violet-y down here. Get a little bit more out here. So the other thing about working in sketchbooks is you can, like if I get these big shapes down, big shapes first, big shapes, it gives me some kind of a structure. Oh, see, that's kind of starting to come together. I'm going to leave it so loose like that for as long as I can. Sometimes, this is me jumping forward. Sometimes I will go in with a fountain pen. And if you get into fountain pens, I'm going to spend all your money because they're beautiful and lovely. And there's so many ways to collect pens and gorgeous little bottles of ink. So Goulet Pens is the site that I love, and you're welcome. And I'm sorry. So I will come in, sometimes I'll come in and see I can really do a very crisp line with, I'll just do it down here with my fountain pen, right? And this is kind of it's a red, you can't really see it. Then if I don't like it, I'm like, oh man, that's bad. I will just go in and spray it. And that'll just bleed out. Well, I might do it up here because I'm like, okay, that's not what I wanted. So that gives that kind of loose, it's a beautiful color though. I think it's called ox blood. So I'll let that dry. And the details, the really fine details that I come in with sometimes are these really crisp lines with a fountain pen on the very tail end of a drawing. Is this dry enough? Not really, but I might save that for example, let's say I'm going to do kind of the details in one of these petals. I'm going to add a petal that doesn't exist, but I can kind of follow it with you can kind of get a feel for what's kind of possible for something like that. Of course, that's not what I want for this particular drawing, but it's a way to kind of introduce a harder edge, a cleaner edge. And don't be afraid to, I do a lot of putting down and taking up and down, up and down. So that to me doesn't work. And I'll just kind of push that back for now. And then I'll put something else over the top of that. So Are there any questions? Because I know it's 5:02. I want to make sure I answer questions.
There was a question on where can you purchase the concertina sketchbook? Someone had asked.
There's a couple of them, like the little bitty ones. You can find those around. Where are they?
They have them at Wet Paint, I think.
Yeah, you can find those around. Can you hand me that little one, tech guy? Thanks, honey. These you can find around for sure. And like this is the smallest I've ever worked. Wow. What's fun about these is it's like it just the two-sided thing just when you think you're like done, you go, whoa. And then this one is this one I had to find on eBay. It's Seabright is the brand. And so the reason I got this one is because I wanted something bigger in concertina book. And I kind of figured out why they don't make them bigger, because they don't really stand up if you get them too big. They're too floppy. But that kind of gives you an idea. This one is probably 8x5. This one is 4x6. Really too tiny for me, but they're fun to work in. And that's what the July workshop is going to be. We're going to work in concertina books.
Oh, there was another question about the Goulet pens.
It's a family name. It's Goulet.
Like Robert.
Goulet. Yeah, like the singer. And they have really beautiful pens and gorgeous little bottles of ink that are like oops, here we go. Little jewels.
The website.
Goulet pens.
Yeah. And there was a question about the ink. Was it permanent?
I buy both because
Oh.
I want to be able to spray them and have them, I want them to be water soluble. And so I buy a little bit of both. This particular pen is one of their cheapest. It's like $14, $15. And they have this at Wet Paint. I think I first bought it there and it is divine. This is really, this is your gateway drug.
That's
Is
great.
that the one with the nib?
What's the brand?
Clothespin.
Here, I'll put it on my desk. Hang on a second. It is platinum, carbon platinum, and I'll put it right here. You can get this one at Wet Paint because that's where I start. That's where it all started. As you know, that's where things start.
Danger.
Yes, different nib sizes. Like in this particular one, so it started out with these cheap $15. I was like, oh my God, that's so amazing. I need more of those. And then I would put different color inks in the same pen. That's not so bright because then you don't know what color is in each pen. So then I started buying pens that were the color that I put in it. Like this is like a red, really deep red. And so like, okay, we are on one slippery slope right here. So this ink is one that I like. It's very sepia, kind of yellow brown. And then again, so then I was like, oh, what is this? What is this bottle? Oh, what is this marigold ink and pen? So it's crazy. You're welcome.
Oh dear.
Oh dear is right.
Thank you
Wonderful.
all for coming. I really appreciate it. It's just about practice and enjoying the process. And like a lot of artists, I get frustrated. I overwork things. I feel like I've just wasted a bunch of time. And then you get better. And then things work one day and they don't work another day. So it really is about just doing it for the love.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Could
you,
talk-
Pam.
Could you talk